I'd like to live a slower life. The weather gets in my words, and I want them dry. That's the opening lines of The Weather, a poem by John Newlove. He was known as the poet of the prairies, and he was inspired by the province where he was born, Saskatchewan. Newlove died in 2003, but a new collection of his letters has been released to shine a light on who he was. Jeff Weingart has edited the collection and joins me now to talk about The Weather and the Words. Good morning, Jeff.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for being here. So before we get to the book, what is it about John Newlove that has inspired you?
In 1968, Maclean's magazine had published 8 poems by John, and they prefaced that publication saying, "We never publish poems, and we're only publishing these because they're plain language. Anyone can read them, anyone can love them." And that, to me, sums up what's great about John's work, that it's readable, it's readable for the scholar, it's readable for the layperson. Anyone can pick up the poems and enjoy them. And the more time you spend with them, the more you'll find to love. There's a bit of an iceberg quality there. You know, you enjoy that first encounter, but the deeper you go, there's so much more.
When did you discover John Newlove?
So the very, very first time was he was assigned reading in my undergraduate at the University of Toronto. But then a few years went by, and I was just, as part of my master's, expected to read very broadly, and I came across him again at that point as a major voice of the 60s and 70s. And it was coincidence that while I was reading him, I thought, wow, this is really great poetry. I wonder what else he's done. It turned out his selected poems had just been published that year, as had a documentary. So I went through all that and took it as a sign to spend a bit more time with him.
So the letters that are in this book, where did you find those?
So the majority of them came from the University of Manitoba in Winnipeg. I was there in 2011, going back quite a while now. I was there for about 2 weeks, scanning, photographing everything I could get, with the idea that one day I'd probably write a book of letters. So I gathered a lot of them from there. But I also had some time at the University of Toronto, where they had about 25% of all of his letters. And the rest were from archives all over the country. I was emailing archives where I thought John might have, written another poet, and looked into their archives to see if John had letters there. Or I'd have friends and colleagues and writers say, "Oh, hey, like I have a couple letters from John if you want to take a look."
Wow.
So they're from all over.
Yeah. With whom was he corresponding?
A lot of different people, politicians and poets, and he has letters to famous, well-known writers like Margaret Atwood, Michael Ondaatje, George Bowering, Al Purdy. A lot of these writers, they all ran in kind of the same circles, and John was actually very good friends with quite a few of them. Atwood and John in particular were quite close for a while. And so a lot of the letters are, between poets and other writers, but publishers. He also worked as an editor at McClellan and Stewart in Toronto, so he would be writing to poets or novelists as an editor, not as a friend or equal. And then he also has a lot of letters to family letters. Also letters like fan mail, students who would write him and ask, where do the poems come from? Those kinds of questions.
How did you go about choosing them?
Yeah, that was really tough. So there were about 3,000 letters I had to work through, and I ended up with around 300. And so my main thing was I wanted the letters to be, I describe them as kind of like a trinket store, that you walk in and there's a bit of everything, and you can pick whatever trinkets off the shelf that, appeal to you as a reader. So some of the letters were about biography, where was John? What was he doing? How did he write? Some of them were about philosophy, like how did John and his contemporaries think about poems and writing? Others were about, literary culture generally, like what was happening in Canada and Canadian history at that time. But then a lot of them are also about other things, like John's struggle with mental illness and mental health issues, John's struggle with addiction. And he was severely addicted to alcohol and cigarettes. And I really wanted to show lots of different sides of the era, the person. I didn't want this to be just John, and who was John as a poet, but who was John as a person? Who was the era? What was the era about? And I feel like the book shows a lot of different sides of people in the time.
Do you think that his alcohol addiction impacted his art at all?
His writing, I mean, not necessarily his writing so much. He had this, he was very well known for having a totally tidy workspace and clean desk, clean little perimeter around his desk. No one could cross the perimeter. He lived there to write, and no one bothered him. And at the same time, though, his career, absolutely. He would write sober for as much as as far as I'm aware. But when it came to other things, he worked drunk as an editor. He did talks drunk. He lived as a severe alcoholic. And so that got him into fights. He would really alienate a lot of people because he could be a pretty aggressive alcoholic. When he was drunk, he could be very confrontational. And, there are letters in the book where he says, I quit on Friday, but I got hired back on Monday, after a big falling out with someone. So he had a lot of conflict with people, and he alienated himself from a lot of people.
What do you think it is about letters that we find is so interesting?
I say in the introduction to the book that it's like being a bit of a fly on the wall in the past. You get to see things. These were never meant for public consumption, right? No one was ever meant to read these. And John, there are poets who one day plan that, I'm sure someone will read my letters. They have that ego. But John especially did not have that ego. He writes openly. He doesn't think anyone will ever care about what he said. And so you find out, I think, things that John would never have said publicly. About himself, about his family, about his writing. And I think you also get to really see kind of the person stripped bare. And there's that. But I think it's important to remember that culturally, letters, they serve the function that nothing else could.
Yeah.
There were no texts, there were no emails, there were no websites. Long distance calling was completely unaffordable, and many of these writers were so broke they didn't even have phones. So if a lot of the letters are letters of introduction, like, hey, I read your poem from this issue of that magazine. I'm wondering if you want to work on something with me. There are fan mail or begging for money even. There are letters where he's writing to other poets saying, hey, I'm broke, I can't afford groceries, could you send me a check? So letters fulfilled a function that I think we really, really underestimate how important they were historically to forming community.
So it's also like, contemporary history.
Yeah. So it's not that long ago.
Yeah. For people interested in this book, where can they get it?
So you can get it from Wilfrid Laurier University Press. That's the publisher. They have a 20% discount on right now. If you type in Newlove 20 on the checkout, you'll get 20% off. If you don't feel like doing that, that's okay. I'll forego the royalty. Just order it to your local library and you can take it out for free.
And besides The Weather and the Words, I know it's out, but what else are you working on?
Right now I'm working on a book about a history of creativity and genius. Again, that kind of trinket store idea, that different case studies and how we've conceived of the idea of being a genius in history across the last few thousand years. So I'm hoping that book will be a little more of this, take what you want out of the book.
Well, come back and talk to us about it
when
it's done. Jeff, great to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
That is Jeff Weingarten. He edited The Weather and the Words. That is a collection of letters from poet John Newlove. 8:21 now on the morning edition. It's time to check in at the CBC Business Desk with Krista Lee Ramlichan.